Hello, my name is Gretchen Brion-Meisels, and I'm a senior lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I want to welcome you to today's Education Now webinar. Our Education Now series provides actionable insights and strategies to shape new approaches to challenges in education. As you listen, you can submit any questions that you have via the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You'll also find closed captioning access there. We have a lot to talk about today, so I'm very excited and honored to welcome our guests. We have Elizabeth Englander, the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Aggression Reduction Center at Bridgewater State University, and Samir Hinduja, the Co-Director of the Cyberbullying Research Center. He's also a professor at the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Florida Atlantic University and an associate faculty member at the Berkman Klein Center here at Harvard University. I'm so honored to be in conversation with you, Elizabeth and Samir. Welcome. I thought we'd start today by just giving each of you a chance to help us understand a little bit about how you think about the struggle or the issue of bullying broadly. Bullying has been around for a long time, but I wonder if you can start by telling us a little bit about some of the major challenges that students, educators, and schools are currently experiencing given the digital age we're in. And Elizabeth, perhaps we'll start with you.
Thanks. And thanks so much for having me, Gretchen. It's a pleasure to be here. At Mark, we work with hundreds of schools every year. And it's really remarkable this year, particularly how consistently certain issues have come up over and over and over again. So, for example, we're seeing in kids a lot of issues related to mental health struggles. Kids who are struggling with anxiety and depression. We're seeing problems with social skills, which is really important because kids who have stronger social skills are kids who experience less bullying and less cyberbullying, and they're better able to cope when it does happen to them. I think also it's fair to say that the sort of explosion in AI and the incredibly rapidly changing landscape in tech is having an effect on kids too. Really interestingly, we started this year some interviews with kids about AI and VR specifically, and we heard a lot of anxiety about it, which is kind of interesting, excitement, but anxiety too. And finally, I think that this is a really challenging environment to be growing up in. These are not easy times. There's a lot of conflict and difficulties between the adults. There's a lot of bias and intolerance in the environment that kids are growing up in now. And, we always say that kids follow the lead that adults set. And so I think it's really a challenging time for kids to learn about these kinds of issues.
Yeah, that resonates deeply with me. And Samir, I wonder if you want to add to that, and specifically if you have thoughts about what steps we as adults, as educators, school leaders, or even as students themselves can take to create more positive learning environments that will help address some of these issues.
Sure, Gretchen. I agree with Elizabeth. I'm thankful that our nation has seemed to prioritize in the last few years well-being and mental health amongst youth. And definitely a lot of that is tied into social relationships, and much of that also ties into bullying and cyberbullying. It is an incredible time to be alive, but we also need to be thinking about all the pressures that adolescents are under. It's a mountain's worth, and continue to be gracious as we come alongside of them. One way to come alongside of them, as you mentioned, has to do with building positive school environments and climates. When I think about a climate, I think about a constellation of elements coming together. Those might include safety for sure, and school spirit, but also connectedness and belongingness and peer respect and morale, not just morale of the students, but also every member of the of the school community. And so research is very, very clear that as you amend school climate, you achieve all of these goals that we want as educators. And that, of course, involves a decrease in problematic behaviors, but also an increase in attendance, a decrease in truancy, an increase in academic achievement, and of course, morale and all of those specific goals that we're seeking on a daily basis. And so I think that you mentioned, what are some strategies that I've seen work? I'll share a few, and then I'd love to hear from Elizabeth as well. It takes a lot of intentionality. I feel that many schools are slammed and overextended and under-resourced. But the schools that I visited that seem to be doing well in this, they have earmarked resources and personnel, and they found the monies for curriculum and various other initiatives where they enlist the student body as well to build climates, to make sure that we have positive relationships between students as well as between students and staff. One initiative that I'm a huge fan of is called purposed pairing. And that's where you intentionally partner for example, fifth grader with a first grader, or an eighth grader with a sixth grader, a 12th grader with a ninth grader during the orientation session where that younger student is coming in to join the ranks. That older student is tasked with the leadership responsibility of teaching that younger student about expectations, social norms there, getting them hyped up about this is an amazing atmosphere and climate, and we're so stoked that you're going to be part of it. But with that come certain standards, and we believe you can rise up. And I'm here as an older buddy to help you. So that older student grows in leadership skills, and the younger student then has a point of contact who's not an adult, who they might be a little bit hesitant talking to, but who's seemingly a cooler, younger individual who's kind of got the lay of the lands. And so I think that just leads to better conversations, more openness, more dialogue, and more assistance being shared between students, which is what we as adults need.
I love that. Thank you. Elizabeth, do you want to build on that? What other thoughts do you have about prevention strategies, ways that schools and adults and even young people themselves can try to intervene or prevent the types of harm that are happening when students experience bullying?
Sure. So I think one of the difficulties that I often see in schools is that it's sometimes hard for people to envision what we're talking about when we talk about school climate. Like what does that mean exactly? Sometimes I use an analogy that schools tell me they find very helpful, and that is to think about a school as a beach. Think about if you're sitting on a beautiful beach and it's very relaxing, very positive, and you have the sunshine and the waves and the sand. Now imagine that beach is not so beautiful. Imagine that it's covered with garbage and litter. And, the nice elements are still there. All of the programs you're running and everything we're all trying as adults so hard to do is there, and it's still positive, but the kids can't really focus on the positive stuff anymore because all they're doing is focusing on all the garbage around them, and they're sort of trying not to touch it or be involved in it, trying to avoid it. I think that we really have to focus on how the kids treat each other, and some of that sort of minutia, and some of that is involved in issues around things like implicit bias or sort of small behaviors that can really kind of poison a school climate. I've found that kids are really good at this, that they are really eager to be involved. Some of the programming that Samir was talking about, which is all wonderful, and I completely agree with, is really part about empowering kids to think about improving their own school climate, not just sort of being passive vessels that the adults fix. But I found that kids do really well when we say to them, let's think about all the little bits of garbage that you're throwing all over this beautiful beach. And let's try to clean it up a little bit so that we can all focus on the nice things that we see all around us. I feel certain that Samir, who is in Florida, will appreciate the idea of a beach as an analogy. But sometimes things like that, those kinds of analogies are really helpful because they help people understand what you're talking about when you talk about a school climate.
Yeah, it makes me think also about the importance of members of a school, all of the different stakeholders, including young people, coming together to really talk about what's the vision for the school they want, right? What is litter and what is beautiful? Because our definitions of what is beautiful are sometimes really different depending on our past experiences or the context we're coming from. And so really thinking together about how do we set a community norm and vision for the kind of school we want? And then how do we, I love what you said, Elizabeth, empower everyone, including young people, to step into that and to take responsibility for upholding that kind of school community and that vision. In your book,
And actually, the young kids have the most power in this by far. I mean, it's really the kids who hold the key to a lot of this. What we want the adults to do is sort of facilitate this. We want the adults to make it easier for the kids. We want the adults to be there when the kids need them. But like Samir was talking about, it really works well for the kids to hold each other up and to really empower each other. And so that has to be a central goal of any kind of work in this field.
A couple ways that I've seen that done, just briefly, is the formation of student advisory boards. Many adults, they get together and they, over coffee and donuts, they figure out what they want to do when it comes to policy and programming, but formally creating and maybe providing T-shirts or some other sort of insignia or, way to make it special for a group of students to say, look, you're going to meet every week with us, and we really want to hear your voice. And then they validate their voice. Then those students feel a lot more empowered to come to those adults with ideas, not just during those meetings, but throughout the school year. And I think that is what we need. We need them to feel emboldened, and we need them to feel like we value their voice. And the second thing, briefly, is that our students have so many talents. And so can we identify those who grew up in dance and tap them with the task of coming up with a flash mob related to anti-bullying? We tap those who grew up in theater to come up with skits or scenario or role-playing activities to sort of convey in a much cooler and relevant way than adults could with the student body a specific topic that we care about, whether it's digital dating abuse or sexting or cyberbullying. And so I think I know that Elizabeth would agree with me because she's all about empowerment, and I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've also seen young people engage in research with with the adults at their school, where they are participating in analyzing the data and really thinking about what the data tells us, and really powerful, often theater-based approaches where young people are helping other young people imagine what upstanding or interrupting looks like, or what it looks like to ask for consent in a relationship, in ways that as adults we would make it very cheesy and probably irrelevant, but they're able to support each other. So I really appreciate that as well. Elizabeth, in your book, you talk a little bit about gateway behaviors and the importance of both students and adults really understanding what those behaviors are and how to respond to them. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about them, and also a little bit about how you suggest people respond when those behaviors come up.
So yeah, this is try to think of gateway behaviors as sort of the litter on the beach. Gateway behaviors are when kids behave, or adults behave contemptuously towards each other. And, most bullying today has sort of shifted to either psychological tactics or technological tactics, or technological tactics are psychological by nature. I mean, they're not physical, not yet anyway, maybe someday. But, gateway behaviors are expressions of contempt. So it's things like mocking people, or making fun of them, or ignoring them when they talk, or whispering about them and pointing to them right in front of them so they know they're being talked about, or, rolling your eyes and making noises when somebody has an opinion in the middle of class. Those are all examples of gateway behaviors. The key thing to understand about these behaviors is kids use them in all kinds of situations. So in our research, we find that kids use them when they're cranky, when they're mad at each other, when they're in a fight, when they're bullying somebody. So gateway behaviors do not mean that bullying's happening, but bullying is very often done through them. But more than that, when other kids see kids walking around behaving in this way, it makes the school climate a very unpleasant place to be. Unpleasant for the adults and unpleasant for the other kids. And so it's really important for everybody to recognize these and to understand that they are not okay. I think that it's very easy to fall into a situation where they happen so frequently that you just sort of let it go. It's a small transgression. You're not going to come down on a kid every time they roll their eyes. That would be totally ridiculous. But what you can do is tell kids, whether you're a peer or whether you're an adult, you can tell kids that, treating people like that is not okay, and that it bothers you. And I think that's a really important distinction, because what we have found in our research is that when adults say something like, well, you're hurting Jennifer's feelings, then Jennifer pipes up and says, oh, I'm fine. Don't worry about it. I'm okay. It doesn't bother me. And then the adult is sort of left not knowing what to do. It's really important to own it and to say, something, this really makes for an unpleasant conversation in class when you're snorting and making fun of people who have opinions. So I really don't want you to do it anymore. It bothers me. Don't do it. It's not that complicated. And we actually have new research that shows that kids who go to schools where a majority of the adults respond to gateway behaviors report significantly lower levels of bullying, lower levels of social cruelty. They report lower levels of feeling like they can talk to the adults. They have lower levels of feeling like they have peers they can connect with. And so it seems to be associated with sort of a range of things that really impact school climate.
It's really resonating with me, the importance of the adults both taking responsibility for their own behavior and the way they may also express themselves towards other adults, and then also taking responsibility for the safety and the well-being of the space itself. I think about myself as a queer kid and how hard it would have been to talk about being a lesbian as a kid if I was being bullied, but how important it would have been for my teacher to say that homophobic language was hurting them, right? Not just me, but them also. And so the power that adults have in that space. Samir, I wonder if you want to add anything about resilience and about the kinds of things adults can do to foster resilience, which I think Elizabeth is starting to talk about among young people in this current climate.
Sure. My colleague, Dr. Justin Passion, over at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, and I have studied a number of positive psychological assets over the years, one of which includes resilience. I'm a huge fan of it. And I feel like in general, it tends to be neglected. Resilience, of course, simply means the ability to overcome adversity, to bounce back. And we would want our youth to handle various mild and even moderate forms of aggression and conflict, whether they occur offline or online. Of course, if it's physical, or threats, I'm not going to advocate for resilience. But generally, most of what we see, as Elizabeth knows so well, gossip, rumor spreading, exclusion, et cetera. And the reality is that you and I are going to experience that. Our kids are going to experience that on a weekly basis, whether it's in the workforce or with in-laws or other populations. So growing in that skill set, I think, will really set them up for success as adults. What we've seen work, and there's a lot of qualitative research done about this, is, for example, improv. A lot of growing up is learning how to improvise, being able to think quickly on your feet, engaging in banter where you're able to sort of deflect and add humor to the situation. And so we've seen schools able to do something along the lines of whose line is it anyway? And that has really helped a lot of the students be able to sort of level up with those skills necessary, which then translates into their social experiences. We've also seen a lot of initiatives related to what's called counterspeech. Counterspeech is where you are able to present an alternative narrative, either online or offline, instead of immediately trying to censor or shut down somebody's comments or sentiments when they're ugly or mean or cruel. And so that could look like a number of things. It could look like humor. It could like, deflecting or distracting. It could look like you're trying to send messages that elicit empathy. And there was a research project done involving about 1,300 social media users who kept sending out all sorts of racist and misogynist statements and sentiments. And what worked best was other individuals sending out various sort of pointed messages to try to elicit empathy, to try to get them to think about how would you feel if somebody pressed certain buttons that you're specifically sensitive about. And so making it very personal, and I think this is one of the questions that I saw pop up in the chat or in the Q&A, making it very personal and raw in one-on-one sessions can help an adult, whether it's a counselor, administrator, or teacher, work with a student who tends to be someone who shrugs it off and who says, oh, I was just messing around, or yeah, we were just joking, it's not a big deal. Why does that other kid have to be so sensitive? So again, bringing it back to what they're sensitive about goes a long way.
I completely agree with everything Samir said. And, what's really interesting is when we study kids and how their resiliency changes, a lot of kids are not born feeling very self-confident temperamentally, but they kind of develop resiliency as they grow. And a big way they do that is they have a success experience. So they have a challenging social situation, and they have an experience where maybe they figure out a way to talk to the person, or maybe they have a friend who sticks up with them or gets them out of the situation. But they have a success experience that makes them feel like, hey, maybe I can handle these situations. Maybe I do have that capacity. And I think that there are so many situations where everyone feels very sensitive, especially today. About 3 out of 4 of the kids in our consortium study tell us that they see bias every week on social media. And so this is, we're really flooding the gates with this kind of stuff. And I do think a lot of our focus needs to be on helping kids figure out how to use the resources they have, whether it's talents they have, whether it's friends they have, what it has, but really help them develop those personal resources so they feel like they can cope.
There are a lot of great questions coming in from the audience. And one thing that is making me think about, Elizabeth, is a question about how parents and adult caregivers can support their children. There's a question here from an attendee who's struggling to advise their kids, who's struggling with parents who advise their kids to fight back or sort of stand up for themselves or return the aggression when facing teasing from their classmates. And I think that's one version of many things we see parents do to try to support their own children who they love and care about, to figure out how to cope, right? How to build this resilience.
Right.
I wonder if either of you have thoughts about advice for parents or for other caregivers who are trying to support young people who may be coping with bullying, or either as an aggressor or as a victim.
There's a lot that parents can do, but there's some things they can't. So that's really hard, though. I think the hardest thing about being a parent, honestly, is when you see your child hurting and you want to just fix it, and you can't always just fix it. But there are a lot of things that parents can do. I don't advise parents to tell their kids to fight back or be aggressive in return, simply because that's a tactic that bullies sometimes use to get their victims in trouble. So then they'll turn around and say to a school administrator, he hit me, and it's going to be less relevant that they were a victim first. So it's not a strategy that I think is a great idea, or one that really helps. Instead, what I would focus on is helping my child draw on the resources they have. So for example, if they have friends, encouraging them to think about how to get their friends to stick by them. If they're struggling socially, if somebody's being mean to them, go and sit for lunch or go and play on the playground with your friends. Don't just stand there and take it. Strategies like that can be a lot more effective, and you're not going to get in trouble for it. And, it's going to work better. And families really have a unique role to play with their children. The support and the love, Gesundheit, Gretchen, the support and the love that children get from their families, the family time they spend together, the chance they have to just talk with their parents and their siblings is so incredibly important developmentally, and is such a strong protector. We found that eating dinner with your family regularly, kids who do that are significantly less likely to be involved either as a bully or as a victim in either bullying or cyberbullying. So just small things where you spend time together and you really develop your family relationships can really help kids cope with what can otherwise be a very difficult social situation.
Just to build on that, one of the activities that I've done for a while, and it was also featured in a PDF put out by the Center for Digital Thriving over at the Harvard Graduate School of Education with Carrie James, Emily Weinstein, and that entire team, has to do with values. And so you can go online, use Google to just look up a list of values, and then work with your child and say, okay, let's try to identify your top 5 values that you'd like to build your life around. You want to be known for these values. Maybe you're not fully known for them now, but down the road, this is what you want Samir or Elizabeth to be known for. So they take some time, they brainstorm about, who they really want to be. They circle those 5 values. And then as it relates to the teasing they experience, the name calling, any sort of, social stressor that comes their way, as a parent, I want to go back to them, to those values, to those North Stars, to those non-negotiables, and say, this is what we're going to build our identity upon. This is what we decided, you decided to sort of use as your foundation as you continue to develop and become the best version of yourself. And having that guiding light, I think really anchors them in a very, very positive and serious way, which is what we need, because otherwise we're just floating on the breeze like a feather, and then peer perceptions, they really affect us, and that's not what we want.
And think of your own values too, right, Samir? I mean,
Absolutely.
because your values that you're going to project onto your children to a large degree, if, I think it's probably very likely that parents like me and Samir, because of the nature of our work, have a very strong value around how people should treat each other. And, it's not too surprising that I would guess that all of our collective children would, say, wow, that really matters, how you treat people, just by virtue of the fact they're growing up with us as their parents. And so, think about what values appeal to them, which may be different from yours, but also think about your own and what you want your children to see is really important.
The work coming amazingly to the end of our half hour. And I thought I would throw in one more question from an audience member. This one is often a topic of conversation at my dinner table conversations with my family, which is, what is the role of smartphones in how we in this sort of climate, and how can adults, educators, or parents support young people, given the role that smartphones often play in cyberbullying, to manage and navigate their relationships with that technology? I know that's a big question, but I wonder if each of you might give us one or two thoughts on that before we close.
Huge question, Gretchen. We could have done an hour and a half just on smartphones. But, just to put it in place sort of very briefly, smartphones are a huge influence on kids. There's no doubt about it. But I think that I find overall that I see a lot of progress in how kids are managing smartphones and gaming and social media and now AI. I don't see it as a static issue. I think kids can learn. I think they can grow in this area. And I see evidence that kids are learning and growing in this area, that they are actually getting better and better at it. So I think we're kind of in a rough patch socially right now, where we're sort of learning how to use this technology. And one result of not knowing a lot is that we can't guide all that well. But I think that things are going to get better in the sense that kids growing up now are going to learn more and more about how to manage technology so that, it's sort of, they're running it and it's not running them, that kind of thing. But I do think it's a huge challenge. I think I'm sure Samir has got a couple of good nuggets on this one.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on forever about parental monitoring and supervision. I think what I would say, just to sort of put a bow on this, is I'm also encouraged, and we continue to need all stakeholders to use resources that they have at their disposal, because there's a lot of great things coming out. For example, our Cyberbullying Research Center has put out resources devoted to digital citizenship and media literacy, which of course involve the use of smartphones in very positive and pro-social ways. Elizabeth Center, Mark, puts out a lot of really cool resources and information towards that end as well. And so I would hope that, parents and other youth-serving adults don't feel helpless, but understand that those who are on this call, we all want to co-labor together in order to make progress in this area, and there is help to be had.
And just one last thing, don't forget, parents, to model good technology behaviors, because, now your kids are going to be watching you and watching what you do. So show your kids how to live with technology in a healthy way. Show them situations where it should be put down. Show them cool things that you learn how to do. Ask them what they're doing, and make sure that you're treating others well online.
Thank you both so much. One thing I'm really taking with me from this conversation, in addition to just the reassurance as a parent that there are resources out there, is the importance of partnering with our children and partnering with our students in really doing this work together. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much to our guests, Elizabeth Englander and Samir Hinduja. Take care and have a lovely afternoon.